Welcome to the Injury Law Pod, the podcast that explores and demystifies the complex world of personal injury law. Each week, Missouri personal injury attorney Eric Bartlett dives into the legal issues surrounding personal injury cases to help you understand your rights and options when seeking justice and compensation for personal injuries. So sit back, relax, and let's explore the world of personal injury law together.
Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Injury Law Pod. I am your host, Eric Bartlett, 28-year personal injury lawyer, and this is the podcast we deal and discuss with everything related to personal injury and personal injury law. And March is Brain Injury Awareness Month, if you didn't know. And it's an opportunity to do just that, bring awareness to the impact that brain injuries have on many people and how it affects their lives, and to bring about information on how to prevent brain injuries from happening in the first place. So let's talk just a minute about brain injuries, because obviously this is something that is near and dear to all of us who are humans walking around, breathing. We all have a brain and we all need it to be functioning normally in order to have a happy, healthy life. But unfortunately, many people experience some kind of a brain injury, and it can completely affect their entire life. And obviously, everybody knows about a concussion, and a concussion is a brain injury. So it's kind of interesting because probably due to a lot of the awareness campaigns, for example, the NFL now, right? They take concussions very seriously at this point. There's a lot of new protocols in place to protect the players. And also, if a player has sustained a concussion, to then make sure that they are getting the treatment, the rest, whatever rehabilitation is needed, so that in theory, this brain injury doesn't have lifelong impacts on them. As we've seen, a lot of these older football players develop a condition with their brains from so much trauma to their brains over the years while they were playing. And, now there's a big effort in the NFL to try to lessen the impact that these brain injuries have. And so again, a concussion is probably the one that people are most familiar with when we talk about brain injuries. Again, a concussion can range from a mild situation to a pretty major situation. There's grades of concussions. And generally speaking, a concussion is going to fall on the milder side of the brain injury spectrum. But we have to remember this, we're talking about our brains. And so any injury to our brain is a big deal. And obviously, I know in my work, I see brain injuries from concussions with headaches, fogginess, light sensitivity, hearing sensitivity, all the way to where somebody is in a vegetative state because of a brain injury. So there's this whole spectrum, and I've certainly seen it all over the years of doing personal injury work. So let's look at some of the numbers just to give us an idea of the scope and the magnitude of how brain injuries affect so many people around us. There's a good chance you know somebody, or you may have suffered a brain injury of some type in your lifetime. So according to the Brain Injury Association of America, the one that is responsible for making the month of March Brain Injury Awareness Month, the key facts about brain injuries are as follows. More than 5.3 million people in the United States live with a permanent brain injury related disability. Every year, about 1.5 million people sustain a traumatic brain injury in the US. Traumatic brain injuries are a leading cause of death and disability in the United States. And brain injuries can also be caused by stroke, aneurysm, tumor, infection, and other factors. So what are some of the effects? I've already mentioned some from brain injuries, but here on the Brain Injury Awareness site, they talk about physical problems such as paralysis, seizures, vision and hearing loss, cognitive problems such as memory loss, difficulty thinking, problems with attention, and there can be emotional problems. There can be depression, anxiety, and personality changes. Again, I've seen all of this with people that have some type of a brain injury. And the idea is, again, in March, just to explore more about this so people really understand the magnitude of brain injuries and how they affect people on so many different levels. So if I'm just going to cut to a couple of clients that I can think about that we've had. One of those was a young girl in her early 20s, and she was in a really bad automobile accident, hit by a bus. She was a passenger, hit on the side of her vehicle, and lost consciousness in the accident, which is always a telltale sign of a concussion if you lose consciousness. But the interesting part of that is 3 years later, this young girl was still feeling the effects of the brain injury she had. So if you just looked at her, talked with her, those types of things, you would not fully appreciate what happened to her brain in this accident. But when you started digging in and you start interacting with her and you see her trying to answer questions and things like that, you realize that on a permanent basis, she had memory loss. She had difficulty processing with her brain. You asked her a question, memory was difficult, and migraines and headaches continued from the time of this accident forward. She had not had migraines before the accident and after the accident. It was a regular part of her life, and she was getting treated for that. And so it impacted her on a daily basis. But again, if you saw her on the street, you would not necessarily appreciate that this girl had had a brain injury, was dealing with the ramifications of that injury, and needed continuing treatment to help her through that situation. I had another client who was struck on the head by an object in the vehicle when the accident occurred, and had a concussion, and also ended up losing hearing in his ear. And he had balance issues. So balance issues are a big one that can come out of having a brain injury. And there's a specific type of therapy that you can go through to help try and recover that balance. It's called vestibular therapy. And, had to go through that. But on a permanent basis, had the hearing loss and continued to struggle with the balance and a little bit of the processing issues as well. Again, we've had people, sadly, that are in a vegetative state and never recover out of it. So essentially from the time of the accident, they're in a coma, and at some point they're just not able to come out of this coma state. And of course, tough decisions have to be made at that point. So again, seeing all the levels of the spectrum. And again, there's even the ones that are more temporary, where somebody has the horrible headache, has the sensitivity to light. The doctor tells them, no screens, no TV, no phones, nothing like that for a few weeks. Spend a lot of time in a dark room. Again, sounds, they can get a lot of sensitivity to sound, and that can really affect them. And so there's various treatment protocols for all of that, including medication, including types of therapy. And then some of it you just end up having, and there is no recovering that part of the brain that was damaged in an accident. And you might be wondering, what is it? How do you know how a concussion is affecting somebody? How does a personal injury lawyer like me show an insurance company the effect that this has had on somebody's life? Because again, it's very hard. You're not necessarily just going to have a nice, clean image to show dead brain matter. Okay, it's not always there. There are scans that can be done, but they're very expensive. There's some controversy on them, but the ways to really show the impact that a brain injury has on somebody is really through a couple different things. Number one is the people that are around this injured person. So whether it's family members, friends, coworkers, those types of people that knew the person before the injury, have known the person after the injury, they are the best record of demonstrating how this injury to this person's brain has affected them. Because they may be talking about the fogginess, the lack of memory, the difficulty processing, those types of things. They also may be talking about those personality changes, because that's a real thing. When people have a significant enough brain injury, it can literally change how they interact and handle the world around them. And it's scary, because I have seen people completely go off track, lose a lot of the inhibition parts of their brain, and all of a sudden they are essentially out of control. They're doing things that are completely out of character for them. They're not making good choices. And all of this stems from that brain injury that they had. And again, what's the best way? Because, if you're coming into this after an accident and you're trying to get this person compensated for this injury, and if you're just talking about, well, they had a brain injury and this is kind of what they're doing now, well, it doesn't really take on meaning unless you have something showing how they were before. So before, they were a straight A student. They were the member of the student council. They were in the honor society. You get the idea, right? And now they are failing most of their classes or significantly dropped. D's, C's. They're acting out. They're getting in trouble. They've dropped friends that they had before. They've made new friends that aren't necessarily the best kind of friends for them. Those kinds of things. Well, you've got to have somebody talking about what they've seen with this person, because that's what brings it into light. That's what paints the picture for the insurance company to know this had a real dramatic effect on this person. The other thing that is used is something called a neuropsychological assessment. And basically, a neuropsychological assessment is, well, it's done by a neuropsychologist, and it's basically helping to determine the presence and severity of cognitive dysfunction, so brain dysfunction, that processing dysfunction. It's there to potentially confirm or clarify a differential diagnosis. And what that means is, if there's some question about, did this cause something, or did this cause something, or is this what's going on, or is this what's going on? It's there as a tool to help kind of narrow that down as to what is the cause of what people are seeing in this injured person. It also helps people, it helps doctors, mental health providers create effective treatment plans for that particular injured person. It's also there to just help with unraveling the complexities of any of those behavioral changes, things like that. It's a really good tool to be used when somebody has a brain injury and trying to figure out what they need, what's going on, what's it look like, how much of a deficit do they have, and what might help them. And a complete evaluation, if somebody goes to a neuropsychologist, has that assessment done, can go anywhere from 2 to 5 hours. It could even take up to 8 hours, depending on the complexity. I usually see them come in around the 4 to 5 hour mark. And basically what it includes is a testing of intellectual functioning, testing of attention, testing of learning and memory, testing of reasoning and problem solving, that processing that I keep talking about, testing of visuospatial skills, your ability to visualize and handle what's around you, testing of your language and how you're speaking, testing of your mood and your personality. And then usually the person conducting this neuropsych exam, they will review pertinent medical records so they can see what the history is on the person, what the medical doctors have said about the person and about the injury and the condition. And then they interview the person. They talk to them, ask them questions, get some background, those types of things. So it's a really, really useful tool in having that done and then having the interpretation done by the neuropsychologist to really dial in on the effect this injury has had, what a treatment plan should look like, and really helping, especially again, bringing that together with those witnesses that know the person, have seen the person before the accident, seen the person after the accident. All of that together really paints a very good picture when you are presenting this information to an insurance company to get this person compensated for how this injury has truly affected their life. And again, a brain injury, there's no question about it. Even if it's mild, it's going to have some effect on that person. The other thing to remember is this. You might have somebody that's had a concussion or two in the past, and concussions are cumulative, meaning they build on each other. The damage builds on itself. And so, maybe as a kid, somebody's had a concussion, maybe later on they've had a concussion. Now they're in an accident, they have another concussion. And this concussion has really put the icing on the cake, so to speak. It is the one that has really now caused this person problems that are not going away. They're permanent. And again, that's why it's so important for people to understand that a concussion is not just getting your bell rung. I mean, again, not that long ago, concussions were kind of a joke. People would say stuff like that. I remember there was a commercial that ran during football games where the player, he gets hit, he gets up, and they're like, hey, do you know who you are? And he's like, I'm Batman. And it's funny, right? Because clearly he just got his brain knocked around. He doesn't know who he is. But now the world is starting to realize the severity of these things. And again, we obviously all can see somebody that has had a very serious brain injury, or even a moderate brain injury, and the deficits that it brings on in that person's ability to think and process, and maybe again, personality wise. It's the milder brain injuries that it's those nuances of daily life being affected for that person that really has to be examined by people that know concussions. And I always tell people, if you've had a concussion, you want to be seeing a concussion specialist. You do not want to keep your care with a general practitioner that maybe is not dialed in on all the latest medicine surrounding concussions. Listen, again, I cannot say this enough. This is your brain. You want to make sure you're doing everything you can to get the functioning back as best as you can, and make sure all aspects of the injury and how it's affected you are being covered, so that you can go back to living as normal a life as possible. So remember, March, National Brain Awareness Injury Month. And it's a great time to just think about that. And please be safe, protect your head. You only get one. You only get one brain. And most of us, even with the most menial tasks that we have in our lives, we need our brain. So my wife tells me a lot of times she doesn't think I have one, but I'm pretty sure I do. And I try to use it as often as possible. So I hope you found this episode of the Injury Law Pod helpful. As always, if you did, I ask that you leave a 5-star review wherever you came across it. Share it with your friends. And until next time, stay well and stay safe.